In this lecture, we will go over the CFA Level 1 reading on currency exchange rates. The currency market is by far the largest in the world. In 2010, the approximate daily turnover was $4 trillion, and this number is expected to go up to approximately 10 trillion by 2020. Here is what we will cover in this reading. Section 2 deals with the foreign exchange market. We'll talk about basic conventions in the currency market and a little bit about the market itself. Section 3 deals with currency exchange rate calculations. Here we will learn how to calculate a cross rate and forward rates. Then we will get into different exchange rate regimes. And what we mean here is whether a monetary authority pegs its currency against another or lets the currency float. And finally, we will talk about exchange rates, international trade, and capital flows. Section 2, the foreign exchange market. The first point to recognize here is that every currency has a 3-digit code. The US dollar has this code, the euro is EUR, and so on. You can take a look at Exhibit 1 in the curriculum to see the codes associated with some major currencies in the world. The second point is that an exchange rate tells us how much one currency is worth in terms of the other. We might say that 1 euro is for 1.3000 USD. This is an exchange rate. The convention used in the curriculum is as follows. We say that USD over EUR or euro is equal to 1.3000. The currency indicated in the denominator is the base currency, and this currency has 1 unit. So 1 euro is worth 1.3000. We are quoting the price of 1 euro in terms of the dollar. So this is the convention used in the curriculum. You will see other conventions used in the market, and so as not to confuse you, I will not even mention the other conventions. Currency appreciation. This means that a currency is becoming stronger. If we have this exchange rate, 1.3 US dollars to the euro at the start of the year, and at the end of the year, this exchange rate becomes 1.4000. What this means is that the euro has strengthened or appreciated, because at the end of the year, 1 euro is now worth 1.4 USD. So clearly the euro has strengthened. The way you remember this now is by saying that if this number goes up, if the exchange rate goes up, then the base currency has strengthened. If the base currency strengthens, that automatically means that the other currency, which is the price currency, has weakened or depreciated. So remember this, one currency strengthening automatically means that the other currency has weakened. Nominal exchange rate. The exchange rate that I talked about on the previous slide, and one that you will see in the newspaper, is the nominal exchange rate. For example, if we have 105 yen is equal to 1 US dollar, then this is a nominal exchange rate. It tells us that by handing in 1 US dollar, we can get this many yen. The real exchange rate measures the relative purchasing power of one currency compared with another. And since we are talking about purchasing power, that's why this is called a real exchange rate. The real exchange rate is an increasing function of the nominal exchange rate. It's an increasing function of the price level in the base currency, and a decreasing function of the price level in the price currency. And here is the relationship that you need to remember. Notice that again the convention that we are using is price currency over base currency. The P here stands for the price levels. This is the price level in the base currency. This is the price level in the price currency. Let us say that we want to come up with the real exchange rate between the US dollar and the Indian rupee. Say the spot rate, denoted by S, this is also the nominal exchange rate, is equal to 60. And the convention that we will use is INR divided by USD. So notice that here the Indian rupee is the price currency and the US dollar is the base currency. Let us also say that the price level in the United States is 2 and the price level in India is 20. The real exchange rate then for Indian rupee over US dollar, here again note that the US dollar is the base currency. This is equal to the spot rate, which is 60. The spot rate is the same as the nominal exchange rate, multiplied by the price level in the base currency, which is 2, divided by the price level in the price currency, which is 20. So the real exchange rate is 6. Now notice what happens to the real exchange rate if the spot rate goes up but the price levels stay the same. Say the spot rate goes up from 60 to 70, then the real exchange rate increases. In other words, the purchasing power of the base currency, which is the dollar, goes up. If the spot rate stays the same but the price level of the base currency goes up, let's say from 2 to 4, we will have 4 over here, so the real exchange rate will go up. On the other hand, if the Indian price level goes up and all else stays the same, then the real exchange rate will come down. What you must do before moving to the next slide is memorize this relationship. The real exchange rate in terms of price currency over base currency is equal to the spot exchange rate times the price level in the base currency divided by the price level in the price currency. On the next few slides, we will be using this relationship. On this slide, I have simply reproduced example 1 from the curriculum, which deals with nominal and real exchange rates. I want you to read this very carefully and then we will go over the questions. Here is the first statement made by the investment advisor and we need to determine whether this is true or false. And as you start doing these questions, you need to write down the equation that I mentioned earlier, which is the real exchange rate is equal to the spot exchange rate into the price level divided by price level. And remember, the way we described this earlier, this is the real exchange rate and then we have price over base. Here we had price over base. The numerator was the price level in the base currency and the denominator was the price level in the price currency. Given the convention that is being used, the Australian dollar is the price currency and the Hong Kong dollar is in the denominator, so this is the base currency, which means that this relationship can be rewritten as follows. The real exchange rate with Australian dollar divided by Hong Kong dollar is equal to the spot exchange rate. Again, Australian dollar is the price and Hong Kong dollar is the base, multiplied by the price level in the base currency, which is Hong Kong dollar, divided by price level in the price currency, which is Australian dollar. This relationship will be useful as we go through the questions. Coming back to the first question, all else equal, an increase in the nominal exchange rate will lead to an increase in the Australian dollar denominated value of your foreign investment. Let us make sure we understand the context here. The client is based in Australia, and therefore the client thinks in terms of Australian dollars. But this client has investments in Hong Kong, and these investments are denominated in Hong Kong dollars. What the investment advisor is saying to the client is that if the Hong Kong dollar Australian dollar exchange rate, i.e. the spot rate, goes up, then the Australian dollar denominated value of the foreign investment will increase. And this is true because all else is equal, which implies here that let's say that the value in terms of Hong Kong dollars is the same. Let's say that value is 100. If the exchange rate goes up, and notice exchange rate goes up means that the base currency, which is Hong Kong dollars, that currency becomes stronger. If the Hong Kong dollar is stronger, then in Australian dollar terms, the investor is better off. Key point to remember again is that when you have an exchange rate quoted like this, Australian dollar over Hong Kong dollar, the base currency is the Hong Kong dollar. If this exchange rate goes up, that means that the base currency is strengthening. Next question. All else equal, an increase in the nominal AUD Hong Kong dollar exchange rate means that your relative purchasing power for your Hong Kong trips will increase based on paying for your trip with the income from your Hong Kong dollar denominated bonds. This is slightly tricky. Again, the client is based in Australia, makes several trips to Hong Kong, but the cost of the trips is paid using Hong Kong dollars, and this money is coming from the investments in Hong Kong. So here, any change in exchange rate between the Australian dollar and the Hong Kong dollar doesn't really impact the client. The client is taking the coupon payments or the dividends that he gets from his Hong Kong dollar investments and uses that money to pay for his travel expense, which is primarily in Hong Kong dollars. So any changes in exchange rate don't really impact the client. Next question. All else equal, an increase in the Australian inflation rate, and remember, increase in inflation rate means that the price level is going up. This is the price level in Australia, will lead to an increase in the real exchange rate. And then a higher real exchange rate means that the relative purchasing power of your Australian denominated income is higher. So two statements are being made. Let's evaluate these two statements. Here we actually need this particular relationship, and to help you remember, I'm going to rewrite that relationship. The real exchange rate, Australian dollar over Hong Kong dollar, is equal to the spot exchange rate, Australian over Hong Kong, multiplied by the price level in Hong Kong over price level in Australia. We are told that all else is equal. The only thing that has gone up is the Australian inflation rate. So this number has gone up, price level in Australia. This will increase the real exchange rate, and that clearly is not happening. If this price level is going up, then overall this relationship is coming down, which means that the real exchange rate is coming down. So that is false. A higher real exchange rate means that the relative purchasing power of your Australian denominated income is higher. So this is also wrong, because a higher exchange rate, let's just say that we have either nominal or real, it doesn't really matter. When the exchange rate is higher, that means that the Hong Kong dollar, which is the base currency, is stronger, and therefore the Australian dollar is actually weaker. So the relative purchasing power of Australian denominated income is actually lower. So this statement is completely false. Let's look at the fourth and final statement now. All else equal, a decrease in the nominal exchange rate. So we are saying this nominal exchange rate comes down will decrease the real exchange rate. Again, notice that we are using the same convention. Australian dollar is the price currency, Hong Kong dollar is the base currency. All else equal means that the price levels are the same. If the nominal exchange rate comes down, then the real exchange rate will come down. So that is true. And increase the relative purchasing power of your Australian dollar denominated income. If this rate is coming down, that means the base currency, which is the Hong Kong dollar, is coming down or becoming weaker. If the Hong Kong dollar is becoming weaker, that means the Australian dollar is going up or becoming stronger. If the Australian dollar is becoming stronger, that means that the relative purchasing power of the Australian dollar denominated income is going up. So this statement is true. Next, based on the investment advisor's scenario and assuming that the Hong Kong dollar value of the Hong Kong dollar denominated bonds remained unchanged, the nominal Australian dollar value of the client's Hong Kong dollar investment would be how much? This question is fairly straightforward because we are assuming that the Hong Kong dollar value of the bond remains the same. Let's say that the bond is worth 100 Hong Kong dollars. The client is in Australia. If the spot exchange rate, as described in the scenario, goes up by 5%, then in Australian dollar terms, the client will be 5% richer. The 5% return is all coming from the exchange rate because in Hong Kong dollar terms, the investment is still worth the same. And finally, based on the advisor's scenario, the change in the relative purchasing power of the client's Australian dollar denominated income is closest to what? In the advisor's scenario, the spot rate is up by 5%, Hong Kong prices are up by 5%, and the Australian prices are up by 2%. So the change in the purchasing power can be calculated as follows. This going up by 5% means that 1 becomes 1.05. This price level up by 5% means that again 1 becomes 1.05 and then divided by a 2% increase. So we have 1.02. When you do the calculation, you get 1.0808, which in percentage terms is approximately 8.08%. What the curriculum does is express this relationship as a linear approximation, and that linear approximation says that spot rate is up by 5%, so you do plus 5%. The price level in Hong Kong is up by 5%, so you add 5%. And then the price level in Australia is up by 2%. So since this is a division, when you do a linear approximation, the division is represented as a minus 2%. When you do 5 plus 5 minus 2, you get 8%, which is roughly the same as what we have over here. Now, I hope you realize in going through this example that you must know this relationship. Whether or not you fully understand why this holds is besides the point. It's obviously good if you understand why this happens, but for the exam, you must know the relationship itself and how to use the relationship. There are several motivations for FX transactions. Here are a couple of examples: international trade, capital market transactions in other countries, and so on. You need to understand the distinction between hedging and speculating. Hedging is where we engage in a transaction to reduce or mitigate foreign exchange risk. For example, if you have a importer who at some point in the future needs 50 million euro. Let's say that our importer is a United States based company and they will need this much money in euro at some point in the future. The company can engage in a foreign exchange transaction to buy euro on this day at a particular price. This would be a foreign exchange transaction and the intent would be to hedge the risk of the euro becoming too expensive in the future. This is an example of hedging because the company here is hedging its foreign exchange risk, and we'll see examples of this over the next few slides. Speculating or speculation is where a company or an investor takes a position based on a view. If a given investor believes that the Japanese yen will appreciate, he might take a long position in the Japanese yen purely with the intent of benefiting if the yen goes up. That would be an example of speculation. The curriculum points out, however, that at times the distinction between hedging and speculation might be quite blurred, but from an exam perspective, as long as you understand the high-level distinction that I have just made, you should be in good shape. Spot transactions. Spot transactions are transactions that happen today. And in fact, the term used with spot transactions is often T+2. What this means is that an agreement is made today to buy or sell a currency and the settlement happens 2 days later. For some currencies such as the US dollar, the settlement might be T+1, which means that the agreement happens today and the settlement happens 1 day later. Forward contracts are where you agree today on a transaction that will happen in the future. In my speculation example, I effectively talked about a forward contract where at time zero, we are locking in a price for euro. At time zero, we know that we will need 50 million euro, let's say after 3 months or 90 days, and we are concerned about the fact that the euro will become too expensive. So at time zero, we lock in a price. Let's say that price is 1.400 euro to $1. This would be an example of a forward transaction. This amount per euro will be actually paid over here, but the contract or agreement is signed at time zero. This material is also covered in the derivatives section of the curriculum. A related term that is mentioned here in the reading but not mentioned in the learning objectives is a FX swap. And just to be safe, I will describe an FX swap very briefly over here. Let's say that at time zero, we get into a forward contract which expires over here. As we approach this point in time and the original forward contract is about to expire, then if we get into a spot contract or a spot transaction to offset the expiring forward, plus we get into a new forward contract, this combination is called an FX swap. And I'm not going to get into more detail here because, as I mentioned, this is not covered in the learning objectives. Plus, I don't see any examples of practice problems which talk about FX swaps. From an exam point of view, understanding spot rates and forward rates is extremely important. A spot rate effectively is the rate today. It's actually T+2 to be exact, but for all intents and purposes, it is the exchange rate that is in effect today. And the forward rate, as I mentioned, is a rate which is agreed today for a transaction which will be executed at some point in the future. Now I want you to read this text. This is example 2 from the curriculum, and there are several questions that we will go over. Here is the first question. Remember, our client is based in Australia. The client has invested in a bond that is denominated in Hong Kong dollars, and let's say that the client wants to liquidate at the end of 1 year. From an exchange rate perspective or an exchange rate risk perspective, what is the client concerned about? Is he concerned about today's forward rate, the spot rate 1 year from now, or the forward rate 1 year from now? If this is time zero, what the client is concerned about is the spot rate 1 year from today. He is not concerned about the forward rate today because that is a rate that is known. He can go to the dealer and lock in a forward rate. As far as the forward rate 1 year from today is concerned, that is completely irrelevant. What concerns him is the exchange rate that will be in effect 1 year from today. And to be more specific, if he has made an investment in an instrument that is denominated in Hong Kong dollars, then the concern is that the Hong Kong dollar might go down, which means that the value of this investment in Australian terms will be down. Let's look at question 2 now. To reduce the exchange rate risk of the Hong Kong investment, what should the client do? Again, he's here at time 0. This is time 1. His investment is in Hong Kong dollar. To mitigate the risk, what he can do is sell Hong Kong dollars in the forward market. What that means is at time 0, he can lock in a rate at which he will sell Hong Kong dollars. If that rate is locked in here at time 0, then no matter what the spot rate is over here, he will get the rate that is specified in the forward contract. So the correct answer would be C. Then question 3. Over a 1 year horizon, the investment proposed by the investment advisor is most likely, and then which of the following? Now you need to go back and quickly look at the investment which has been proposed. Here is what the advisor is recommending. Exchange Australian dollars for Hong Kong dollars. Remember, the client is Australian. So the client needs to sell Australian dollars and buy Hong Kong dollars. Then invest the Hong Kong dollars in a risk-free, zero coupon, 1 year Hong Kong bond. And then use a forward contract. This would be a 1 year forward contract to sell Hong Kong dollars and buy Australian dollars after 1 year. This is a risk-free transaction. Notice that in terms of the Hong Kong bond, it is risk-free. So we know exactly how many Hong Kong dollars we are getting at the end of the year. And since at time 0, we are also locking in an exchange rate, that means that there is no exchange rate risk. Since there is no price risk and no exchange rate risk, that means that this investment is risk-free. Next, to set up the investment proposed by the advisor, the client would need to do what? Exchange Australian dollars for Hong Kong dollars. What is happening here is that the client is selling Australian dollars in the spot market. So it is one of these two. And then invest in a risk-free Hong Kong bond. That means that we are going to buy a 1 year Hong Kong denominated bond and then use a forward contract. Here we would be selling Hong Kong dollars after 1 year, which is the same thing as buying Australian dollars in the forward market. So that's this over here. The correct answer is C. And finally, we need to calculate the return on the investment proposed by the investment advisor. Look at the numbers given in the question and come up with an answer before you look at the solution. To solve this problem, let's say that we start with $1 Australian. Given that the exchange rate is 0.1429 Australian dollars to Hong Kong dollars, this is the spot rate. We can convert $1 Australian to 7 Hong Kong dollars at this spot rate. 7 Hong Kong dollars are then invested at 7%. After 1 year, we will have 7.49 Hong Kong dollars. And this is the forward rate that we have booked at time 0, which means that at the end of 1 year, we can convert 7.49 Hong Kong dollars at this rate into 1.05 Australian dollars. We started with $1 Australian, end up with 1.05 Australian dollars, so our return is 5%. Section 2.2 talks about the different players in the FX market. We have a wide range of market participants. At a high level though, we have sell-side players and buy-side players. On the sell side, we have large FX trading banks such as Deutsche Bank, Citigroup, UBS and HSBC. Other banks or dealers fall into the second and third tier of the FX market. On the buy side, we have several players. Essentially, it is all the clients who use banks to undertake FX transactions. And here are the different kinds of entities. You can read a line or two about each of these entities in the curriculum. This slide illustrates the market size and composition, and essentially I have reproduced exhibits 3 and 4 from the curriculum. Notice that the largest turnover is in the FX swaps market or foreign exchange swaps. The spot market is 36%. You will not be tested on these numbers, just have a general sense that it is a range of transactions that make up the FX market. And in terms of counterparties, most transactions are either interbank or with financial clients. Non-financial clients only are 13% of the non-financial clients are only 13% of the market. This is now example 3 from the curriculum. You need to say whether this statement is true or false. Foreign exchange transactions for spot settlement see the most trade volume in terms of average daily turnover because the FX market is primarily focused on settling international trade flows. This is completely wrong. The FX market is not primarily focused on settling international trade flows. In fact, this is a small percentage of the overall FX market. Also, as you see over here, the spot market is only 36%. So this statement about spot settlements seeing the most trade volume is also incorrect. The most important foreign exchange market participants on the buy side are corporations engaged in international trade. Again, if you notice over here, this is a relatively small number, so this is incorrect. On the sell side, they are the local banks that service the FX needs. That is also incorrect because on the sell side, we have the 3 or 4 banks that I mentioned, which are the biggest players.